if you execute this right, it's almost guaranteed to succeed because it goes to a real need. You start with a problem. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Prosper, the podcast for principled entrepreneurs. I'm your host, Andreas Widmer, from the Sioka Center for Principled Entrepreneurship at the Catholic University of America. Join me and my guests as faith-filled professionals explore how to build business culture worthy of the human person by creating goods that are truly good, services that truly serve, and a culture where all of us can prosper. This season, we want to move into a little bit of a different topic with the same roots. You know, I never get tired of origin stories, as you call them, especially when I admire entrepreneurs and they tell their stories about how they got to start in business and the obstacles they overcame and how they did it, how it all came together. And we found a very special guest for today to kick off this new season of Prosper. You know, in this season, we sort of invite our favorite people to tell their story, real life as principled entrepreneurs, how this really looks. Last season, we went through the principles, the pillars and everything. Now we just really want to talk about how this gets implemented, how this looks like on the ground. And today I'm joined, as always, by my colleague, Rebecca Teddy. But we're also delighted to introduce to you Brian Walsh, founder of Tipio. That's an online tipping service. And also, he's the founder of FaithDirect. If you tithe to your parish via a digital system, then you're more likely than not to use FaithDirect, which does direct deposit. And they were really the pioneers in this and brought this whole product to market. Rebecca, welcome back to season 2.
Thank you. Great to be here, and so happy to have Brian, who's also our colleague at the Sioka Center, which maybe in full disclosure we need to say, but he's also an alumnus of Catholic University. We're super happy that he's returned to his alma mater to help us with our student business incubator called Venture Lab. We'll probably talk a little bit about that after we hear about FaithDirect and all the drama and glory that launch took. So Brian, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me today. I'm excited to be here.
I started out by saying FaithDirect. Many times people don't know the name of the company, but they know what it does because they probably use it. You were one of the pioneers of going digital with the direct deposit for donations, both in the Catholic Church, but also in other churches. How does one come up with this idea? Did you wake up one morning and say, hey, I have an idea?
No, all my success is due to my wife of nearly 30 years, who actually said to me offhand one day, just about 20 years ago, believe it or not, you're the marketing and fundraising genius. We keep showing up late for Mass, not because we couldn't get our daughters ready. At the time, we had 3 kids. We have 4 now, but because one of us couldn't find the checkbook or the envelope. And that's a true story. I still remember sitting outside our parish, Blessed Sacrament in Alexandria, Virginia. And I said, wow, that's pretty genius. A lot of people don't realize before that, and it's totally fine, that I had about, 12 or 15 year career of having another company, Warfield & Walsh, which was a national boutique fundraising and marketing operation. We were a creative, strategic organization that worked with many high profile blue chip organizations in the Catholic space, grassroots, did a couple of former presidents work for them. And we actually just wound that business down voluntarily in December after 29 years. But so I had a pretty extensive marketing background and the fundraising piece. And it was simply trying to match the opportunity for parishioners like ourselves to say, or to elect to give to their parish on a recurring basis and not have to worry about the checkbook or the envelope anymore.
So you wouldn't call that, I don't know, you tell me, but the technology aspect of it was probably the easier part than the change of behavior aspect or getting it into the church. What's the hurdle? So you think of this, hey, I have an idea and I do this, or your wife tells you the idea. And then
right.
What did you do then?
So actually, Andreas, it was more the technology idea because I've started 2 technology companies, but I'm not a coder. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a developer. It was the understanding by utilizing, first off, our marketing experience to invite parishioners to give this way, I think was honestly our greatest value add. Along the way, I found the right technology partners to do that work for us. Eventually, that was outsourced at the beginning. Eventually, we had 5 full-time engineers on staff. But the beginning part was really, how do you invite a parishioner to give this way? Because as we learned along the way, we saw literally hundreds of parishes would say, well, we offer online giving for our church. And my first response, or the team's first response, would be, well, how many people use this? And they wouldn't be able to tell you. So it was very much a behavior situation that if you prompted them in an appropriate way, the results were by and large pretty unbelievable on participation.
I don't think it's any great surprise. We're all Catholics here and we love our church and we want to help build it up. But it's not as if every parish or even every chancery office is like a hotbed of innovation. So what did it take to change minds? Like, what was your pitch and how did you get people to understand what your value add, as you say?
Great question. I mean, the church is very provincial in so many ways. And our first few parishes that I begged, pleaded, and borrowed to get them to beta test this, ironically enough, were not in our backyard here. I had 2 in Michigan, 2 in New Jersey. So that was great because we demonstrated that we could figure out the technology piece, that we had a marketing plan that we thought would work, and it wound up working. But when you'd come to a parish in the Diocese of Arlington in Virginia or the diocese and say, well, we're doing this, the first question was, well, who in this diocese is using you? And it was an immediate no one. So we replicated that story. When I sold the business 95 times, we were in 95 dioceses by the time we decided to move on. And I'm sure we'll talk about that later. By and large, I was, in some cases, honestly accused of making the church a marketplace. And because we were introducing technology that was, in 2005 was unheard of, to say to somebody, put away your envelopes, put away your checkbook and give to your parish this way because you're beginning to do bill pay and all these other things. So it was clearly an uphill battle. One of the things I talk about in the classroom all the time now is, in starting a business, I think the most critical thing is getting that first champion on board. And what we would do is identify some early, we would call them pastor leaders, that were open to new ideas, innovation. Frankly, they were also interested to see how the financial piece of the ministry could be improved. And we were bringing that solution to the table. So we would, diocese by diocese, eventually get our way to what we would say would be the pastor leader in that diocese. And by doing that in that certain region, in that diocese, others would follow. And it just made the embracing of it a lot easier.
And was this a Catholic only product?
It was a Catholic only product. And that was a decision that I made fairly early on. I mean, there was the temptation to sell in other denominations, and we would have been a much larger entity, a much larger opportunity. But, I always also feel strongly that, our identity was rooted in the Catholic Church. How would I say this? We speak Catholic, and I have nothing against any other denomination. I've got friends that are Presbyterian, evangelical, Jewish, across the board. But it was more transparent for us to be able to go into a parish and be able to understand just how our faith works, how the Mass works. And it was a lot more natural that way. And that was my background. So it was an easier, I think, path forward.
Part of it is you absolutely know the target segment. There's no question. You know exactly the segment and what they're doing. And the church is, that's a difficult enough segment.
Exactly. And in addition to that, there was such a huge opportunity there. When we started this process, this idea, there were about 17,000 plus or minus Catholic parishes nationally. And if maybe 500 were doing something, quote, electronic, that's a lot. So there was just this huge opportunity in front of us. And I think seized on the opportunity, but also delivered a lot of value for the church that, we cared about.
Tell the audience a little bit about how FaithDirect helped some parishes survive, for example, during the pandemic, when collection baskets literally could not be passed.
At a starting point, when a parishioner enrolled in our program, their giving increase was, and we could document this because we had all the data on it, which made it easier to sell, and probably years 3 on, was an individual household increase of about 30%. So what that means is, instead of being at their local parish for whatever reason 38 times a year, that parish was assured of giving 52 times a year, which is, an astronomical ROI when you look at it in that light. COVID obviously was a complete hard stop for masses in person. And I've been told repeatedly, which is a great thing to hear, that because of FaithDirect and that online consistency in giving, those parishes financially, honestly, were able to survive, instead of a church just saying, well, people drop checks off or cash. So it really did make a difference. I think the differentiator in our value, because it became a very crowded space by like 2011 and 12, was the deliverables on how many parishioners actually signed up and used it. So that's the major difference between successful online giving and one that I think falls short of its potential. There's no sense in having an online giving program at a Catholic parish or any denomination if parishioners aren't signed up for it. And that's what we excelled at because we had a communications plan in place. In addition, during COVID, although I had left the company at that point, it was another way that parishes could use some of the services we had, mostly digitally driven, to do outreach to the parishioners, newsletter updates, just notes from the pastor, and things like that.
I'm sure a lot of startup entrepreneurs are listening, and many of them in this space, creating products or services or ministries for the church. And I wonder, based on your experience, what kind of advice you can give about breaking into the market. I would already say the first advice you seem to implicitly give is limit your target market so that you, on the first hand, say, I stay in the Catholic Church, even though this is easily applicable to other churches and denominations as well. And the second one is your strategy of going after where the pastor or the community there has already embraced a bit of technology and innovation, to try to find where that is. Did you use a litmus test for that and say, well, if they're using this, then we use that, then they're on for us, or what?
Yeah, I think the litmus test initially was for us when identifying that best pastor or parish that we were trying to get or use our program was the size of the parish and their weekly offertory. That was the litmus test because that often defined how well the program would do. It's not that we work with parishes all sizes and all different offertory amounts, but over time, it was clear to us to identify those types of parishes that I mentioned. One of the things I also mention all the time when mentoring any business or startup or student, a new concept, is how important it is to stay in your lane, so to speak, and be super defined in what you're delivering. Specific to the church, if they're starting a company in the church, it's so important to you just need one or two, whether it's parishes, dioceses, nonprofit, whatever you're trying to sell as a product, get one of them to validate it. And you can't go forward without doing that process. It sounds super intuitive, but I think often entrepreneurs try to bite off more than they can chew, honestly, from the get-go. And they just wind up spinning their wheels, where if you can get a couple individual case studies that validate whatever your solution is, you're going to go a lot further.
Brian, how do you know as an entrepreneur what your lane is? What I mean by that is when Amazon, like I'm old enough to remember when Amazon first came on the scene and we all thought it was a bookstore. And it turns out Amazon is not a bookstore. It's a delivery master, right? It's a delivery machine. And so what you were trying to do at first, so how did you get from Kara's just saying to you, hey, we're always late because we can't find the checkbook, and you're having a little cartoonish light bulb go off in your head. And then it sounds like a lot of what you did was not just the technical, how do you get people to tithe, but it was really like in a way you were a marketing genius who got everybody to sign on, which other people couldn't easily do.
Right. I think it's understanding what your strengths are. And you're exactly right. Our approach to this was not transactional. It was more relationship building. And I think that's super important to recognize that not only a relationship with the parish, the pastor, finance council people, and then diocese, but also understanding that that giving piece, it's a relationship and should be treated as such in a way where it's not just a transaction. So, I did have an advantage, if you will, going into this because we had run and created so many national fundraising programs, primarily using direct marketing, that we understood how valuable it would be with higher adoption, higher usage. And the only way to get there was to have a documented plan or program, which we created. It was all customized. We had, a great bench of printing partners, mail shops that we worked with. So every parish that we worked with, it was not a FaithDirect puff piece, if you will. It was more whatever parish you might attend. St. Jerome, St. Elizabeth, Blessed Sacrament, all highly customized. Any outreach was under the pastor's name, logo, everything looked and felt like it came from him, although we were sort of the magic behind the curtain, if you will, that made all those things happen.
Well, this is great stuff, but let's take a quick break before we continue our conversation. Hey, Prosper fans, this is your host, Andreas Widmer. Are you a Catholic laywoman, layman, priest, or religious running a beautiful school, parish, or apostolate, wrestling with finance and administrative issues you never imagined when you first answered God's call? Are you striving to build something beautiful for God and His people, but need training in personnel management, fundraising, and managing assets in accord with canon law? The Church Management Program at Catholic University of America's Business School offers a flexible program for you. Our self-paced online program will help you and your team get the tools you need to see your mission advance even beyond your wildest dreams. The Catholic University is now accepting applications for the master's degree in church management for those aiming to begin their studies in early 2025. One can also enroll in individual courses or pursue one of our graduate certificates. For more details, check in the show notes of this episode or visit the website meam.catholic.edu. So with my glasses, with my pattern recognition, what I'm seeing right away is this classic good entrepreneurship that we teach, that you start with the problem, right? Her telling you that we're always late because we can't find a checkbook, that is a classic problem that is identified, and it's like person-centered. So the person in the middle, this is a problem, and now you're going to find the solution. You along the way, you then also bring in Father so-and-so who realizes that they're losing, every time these people miss Mass, they're also losing, not just the sacraments, but the community also loses the contribution from them and so on. And then you start to build a product around this. And this was almost easy to say in retrospect. If you execute this right, it's almost guaranteed to succeed because it goes to a real need. You start with a problem. So many times I see people come here, and I mean, you run Venture Lab, so you know better than me, but people come into the Sioka Center and come with a solution that's chasing around a problem, just trying to come up with a problem. And that's one of the things, is that you really hit a home run with this because you start with the problem.
I agree with you, Andreas. That's one of the first class in our semester is always around what we call the IRL, or the in real life problem. And I see those businesses as having the greatest opportunity because, first of all, identifying is one thing. You obviously have to execute on it. It's a lot easier said than done, I think. But if you're recreating something that another business is already doing, yes, maybe you can do it better than them. But I think if you have the ability to identify, and sometimes they're as simple as, what we started with FaithDirect, it was, I don't always have a checkbook anymore, nor do I have my envelopes. Let's do something about this. It fairly simple at a high level. The implementation of it was a bit more challenging, but nonetheless, I think it's a better path forward to start in that order.
And it's not always clear. I'm not saying that everybody's going to have as a clear visual as you did with the problem, but before you start to develop the solution, it helps to define the problem, to be really clear of quantifying the problem, of what it is, because then the solution is going to be better. And we should also just explain that the venture lab you're running, you're responsible for here at the Sioka Center at CUA, is not just that people come in and they get help with entrepreneurship, but you also teach a class called...
It's now called Venture Lab. So it's been rebranded.
That's a good name. I like it.
Yeah.
And in there, so you do both in Venture Lab itself when people come for this advice, but in the class itself, put people through a funnel in a way that at the end of the semester, the students, our entrepreneurship students, have a pitch or a minimum viable product pitch for it and what they need to do it. What's the process you're using, or what frameworks do you like for that?
I try to keep it very simple. We use the business model canvas, which are really 9 components of any startup. It's very much an ideation class, but at the same time, we introduce things like break-even analysis, branding, go-to-market strategy. Who are your, I talk about this a lot. Who are your champions? If you're a startup, and we can look at the FaithDirect model or business idea, you're selling to parishes. Who are you going to get to buy into this at the beginning? So there's a lot of that. And then we look at great companies and great founders and hear their stories. It's very experiential in a lot of ways. I talk about my businesses, where we are, things like that, and try to give students a peek under the tent, so to speak, of, what we're faced with, good and bad, on a weekly basis. Some of these student business ideas are not just some, a lot of them are great. And I think we're starting to just get things rolling. We're in the 3rd year right now, and we're really starting to see some really interesting business ideas, and students are pursuing them, which is an exciting thing for Sioka, I think, and excited to see where they head with them.
Hey, speaking of peeking under the tent and for good and bad, I wonder if you would share with us your biggest institutional problem or moral crisis or moral dilemma and how you solved it, or at least how you addressed it.
Sure. I've got a couple moral dilemmas I'm happy to share. And maybe start with, because we were talking about FaithDirect, and I'll touch on my new venture, or newer, I should say, Tipio, in a second. I think the biggest moral dilemma I faced with the FaithDirect business was the decision to sell the business. It was a really hard decision. It was time for a bunch of reasons, including, selfishly, I was running 2 companies for 15 years, and I'd hop on a plane in DC, fly to LA for a meeting, and be home the next morning so I could coach basketball practice. And it just became non-sustainable, even though I had great support from my spouse and wife. But ultimately, there were other issues that came to the forefront. We were processing an awful lot of money for parishes nationally. And I personally had a lot of guarantees in the flow of funds. And when you're talking, honestly, millions of dollars, given the number of parishes we had, it became something that was keeping me up at night more and more. So we came to that decision with the other leaders of the company, and I guess it was early 2017, and we were getting a lot of people were knocking on our doors. Strategic companies, private equity companies that were super interested in acquiring the FaithDirect business. So the moral dilemma was, number one, who do I partner with, or who acquires the business that I feel comfortable with? Because I was leaving behind, almost 30 employees. And number two was, what impact will that have on those employees? I mean, all of them were why we were successful. And I knew in any scenario, I'd be moving on. Not that I don't play well with others, but I didn't see me in any role where I'd stick around and work for another company. So it was I wouldn't say gut wrenching, but it was a hard decision, letting them know. When ultimately I selected the partner, we went through 3 months of behind doors negotiation, and no one really knew what was going on, save 3 or 4 people. So it was a tough moment, but once, I think the team understood the why behind it, the moral dilemma that I was faced with, I think without question was the right decision. I have no regrets. Most of those employees, probably 80% of them, are still with the company, which is great. And they've continued to be successful, and their families are thriving, which is great.
Now, we met when you still ran towards the end of you running FaithDirect, and you're an alumni, poli-sci alumni here from CUA. And I think you were on the board of visitors, and that's how you and I met. And you said,
Correct.
well, and I, of course, saw you as an entrepreneur. Then, it's my specialty to jump on people who are in between gigs. And so as you were in between gigs, I think we started to talk, and I started to ask you to get involved in what we're doing here. And you were just figuring out what you want to do. And if the memory serves me correctly, I think we agreed that you would come in here and think about what to do, and then kind of do it here, like to start. You're the entrepreneur in residence, that you start the company here, and that you do a piece of what you're doing here with teaching, but then you actually started a new company and ideated for that and came up with it and built a new company. Tell us about that and how this is relevant for the classes.
Sure. Much like the situation with the FaithDirect, where what the impetus what started that was, not having a checkbook, not having an envelope to put in the offertory basket. Tipio was started to address travelers that do not have cash but would like to leave a gratuity for housekeeping. So there are a lot of parallels in so many ways. And I used to travel almost weekly, and I was faced with this all the time, especially the last 3 or 4 years, because I just didn't carry cash. So we developed what was really considered, if not the first, maybe the second digital tipping platform specific to hotels for non-point of sale employees. So housekeepers, bellhops, valet parking staff, front desk, that anybody that's not, you're not handing them, they're handing you a bill and you can leave a tip. So the timing was, you're right with that, Andreas, because it's when I did start that, it's been a lot more challenging than I thought. I thought the church market was an uphill climb. This is an uphill climb backwards. And as a major player or decision maker at a very large brand recently told me, the digital tipping space is very saturated. So pre-COVID, we went live. We were really the first to get in a live environment and liked what we saw in terms of results. Much like with the FaithDirect thing, it was about adoption and usage. And then 60 days into that, COVID hit. So we had pretty much were sidelined for 2 years. And when we came back to market, there were more than a handful of two hands full of other providers in the space. And, for me, it's like the FaithDirect business. What's the end result? It's getting people to use it. But in the parish world, it was so that they had more, or they had consistent revenue to operate their ministries, both internally at the parish and externally. The Tipio business was largely driven by my desire to help frontline workers, like a housekeeper who was so dependent on tips, but was seeing his or her tips decline because people didn't carry $5 or $10 or $20 bills anymore. And so there's a lot of, I think, parallels there. And early on, my second moral dilemma with this company that Rebecca asked about, one of the challenges I saw was, how do you price something like this? And our early on sort of line in the sand was, we would never engage a organization that had non-point of sale employees, yet for that non-point of sale employee, like a housekeeper, to receive digital tips, that individual employee would have to pay a fee for that. So we lost, and still lose today, a lot of business because we've said, we're here as this is a human resource benefit. You should, as a company, a hotel, valet parking company, whatever it might be, give this as a resource, human resource benefit for your employees and not charge them anything. So that was another moral dilemma, which, has not helped us, to put it mildly, because we're consistently losing business or not earning business because we are expecting that the employer pay our fee. That was a long answer.
No, but it's a good one. And, we're all about this Newhouse said, doing well by doing good. You're a great example of that, Brian, and it's an honor to work with you and to watch how you're doing this. But it's
Thank
also
you.
recognition that this is not easy. Nobody said doing well by doing good is easy, but it can be done, and you're a living proof of it. If people
Well,
want,
thank you for saying that. I'm very fortunate because I've had colleagues along the way that have made us successful. I still stay in touch with them. And obviously, with the Tipio piece, I'm still active with them, and we're continuing every day to your point, Andreas, it's not easy. The former president of Catholic U, when I was there, Father William Byron, said one time to me that the greatest antidote to discouragement is persistence. I see it every day. We all do, and what we're doing working wise. And it was so true because you got to be super persistent if you're an entrepreneur and we say this in the classroom, and talk about it a lot. If you're leery of rejection, it's pretty tough to be successful if you're going to be your own boss, so to speak.
Brian, just quickly, so how can people reach you both at Tipio or at Sioka or the lab?
I'm Brian with an I at tipio.net, Walsh W at cua.edu. My real name is William, and I'm on LinkedIn as W. Brian Walsh. Happy to hear from folks and hear what they're up to, and would welcome, feedback on what we're doing with the Venture Lab at Catholic U, which is exciting, and thrilled and honored to be a part of it and working with both of you and the team. So it's been a great place for me to be.
We'll put some info in the show notes too, so our audience has the opportunity to find that easily and be able to reach out. But thank you so much, because one of the things we teach our students, and we insisted even in season 1, is that you have to have not only a heart for the poor, but also a mind for the poor. And as Andreas has already indicated, one of the things I really respect and admire about you is that your heart always goes out to who's suffering, who is really, really dependent, and then have found a way to earn a living doing good for people who are sometimes forgotten.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Now,
Appreciate that.
last two very quick questions
Sure.
before we let you go is, and I want to develop this, Rebecca, so that we ask everybody some of the same stream of consciousness or quick tidbit questions. If you'd have to name a patron saint for business, who would it be?
I'd probably say St. John Paul II, because I think he recognized that business really does ultimately help the poor in so many ways. So he would probably get my highest vote.
Great. Best business book you read in the last 5 years?
Ooh, best business book. The recent Elon Musk book. Whatever you think of the guy, everybody should read it if you're an entrepreneur, because the takeaway from that is he's obviously one of the most brilliant minds. His ability, I typically have run 2 to 3 businesses at a time and not even in the same stratosphere as where he is. I don't know how he does it, but the number of companies that he's involved with or actually owns and runs is phenomenal. And I actually did learn a lot from that, the dedication to excellence that he strives for. And again, I know that that's maybe not the best way to end, because he can be somewhat controversial, but he's someone everybody should read about.
Test everything, retain what's good, right?
Exactly.
Yep.
This is a good way to land the podcast. As always, if you like this content, please subscribe, leave a positive review if you may, and also rate the podcast in your podcast app. Throw us a bone, help us grow this and get more people. It really does help, and we are very grateful if you help us spread the word.
Friends, before we end today's episode, we just want to add an addendum. Since the time we recorded our conversation with Brian Walsh several months ago, some of the challenges that we discuss in this episode caused him to decide to shutter Tipio. We think that learning to fail well is worth talking about too, and Brian wrote a really nice piece called The Knockout about what he learned, and we're appending that to the show notes.
If you'd like to know about the ideas expressed in this podcast, we invite you to go to our show notes to find links to Venture Lab and Tipio and other things that Brian did and other resources that we have. And we also invite you to visit our website, siokacenter.com, to take our free online course on the Gospel of Work. Thank you, as always, for inviting us into your day, whether you play this in the car or on the treadmill as you're making dinner or anywhere else. We're grateful, and we hope that you prosper.